great compilation tape. Like breaking up is hard to do and takes ages longer than it might seem. You got to kick it off with a killer to grab attention. Then you got to take it up a notch. But you don't want to blow your wad, so then you got to cool it off a notch. There are a lot of rules.
12 albums, 1 cent. Find our ad in Sunday's paper. Take it to your mailbox. You'll get a lot more music. You'll get a lot more life. Look in your Sunday paper.
Welcome, listener. For those about to rock, we salute you. This is our podcast dedicated to exploring and talking about the greatness that was the music of the best decade. If you're ready for the best in retro music topics on the planet, we present for your enjoyment 80s Mixtape Auto Reverse.
Hello everybody, we are back. We had a couple weeks off because of a couple other shows that were on, and now we are continuing our countdown of the years with 1986 and all the great metal that came out. And this was a huge year, and we have a lot to cover. We're probably going to break it up into 2 parts because there's so many albums to talk about. So we're going to just jump right in. First, I'm going to introduce us. I think you guys, most of you know, it's the usual cast. It's Chris.
Hello.
And Tim.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back.
And myself, Scott. And we are just, I'm very pumped up about 1986. It's probably my favorite year of the 80s as far as music goes. I have a lot of albums that I keep going back to from 86. So let's go ahead and get started. And we're going to go with Chris first.
Well, yeah, 1986 is a fantastic year. It's definitely a 2-parter, and probably could even go further than that. There were some quintessential albums by major musical metal forces in this year. So I'm going to start off with what I think was the best album of 1986, which is Metallica, Master of Puppets. Going back now some years ago. We're on 30 years. 30 years this album has been out at this point. Years. I think 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like I said, you look at lists of the greatest metal albums, or, certainly thrash metal, but metal or greatest albums of the 80s, and Master of Puppets is going to be on all of those lists, from any amount of number. But probably their quintessential product, they're coming together as a band as far as writing, as far as music. Live show is now down pat. They're finally starting to get a little bit of radio play, and just front to back. I mean, cover to cover, side to side, whatever way you listen to this album, it's just loaded with greatest hits. It's kind of like a greatest hits album, but it was a studio album from Battery, Master of Puppets, Damage Incorporated, Sanitarium. All of these still play on the radio today. You still listen to them. They still sound great. They still carry over, which I think is a hallmark of a great album that you could listen to 30 years later and the songs still hold for you. They still get you pumped up when you listen to them. You turn some of these on full force and, they change how you feel. And for me, of course, this is my favorite band. This is of any music genre, especially metal and thrash metal. But again, it's to the point also where Metallica was still doing what they do. They weren't bowing down to studios. They weren't shortening their songs. There's 3 8-minute songs, 2 6-minute songs, 5-minute songs. They're still just going out, playing what they play. They're not having the record companies tell them, you have to dress like this, you have to do this, you have to do this. And for me, this is just, this is still and probably always will be my favorite Metallica album. And, even the introduction again of Flemming Rasmussen becoming that sort of that producer that Metallica needed. It's sometimes when you're in music, the producer has enough to do with getting to know the band and what he wants out of them and what the band wants out of them. This is a perfect mixture of that on here. I mean, everything is tight. Everything is recorded well. The lyrics, the music, just unspeakably fantastic album. I could talk for an hour just on these 8 songs, so I'm going to go ahead and let you guys take over and tell how you feel about it.
All right, Tim?
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely my favorite Metallica album. There's nothing bad, or you don't fast forward through it when you're listening to any of it. You don't skip any of the songs. And one of my favorite memories about this album was, I think it was my sophomore year in high school. We had a cool English teacher who would let us bring music in if we felt the songs connected with whatever we were reading at the time. And so I brought this in and made my whole class listen to Disposable Heroes, all 8 minutes and 14 seconds of it, because I felt that it was related to the novel All Quiet on the Western Front, which we were reading at the time. And, obviously I have no idea if the band was inspired by that book, but all I know is they got me to be able to jam Metallica in my classroom for 8 minutes and 14 seconds and then discuss it later. So that was pretty cool. There's just so many great songs on here. And another fun thing, I remember reading, this was one of the first albums. I remember sitting down and one of my buddies had it on vinyl, and we're actually reading the liner notes and reading the lyrics while we were listening to it. And there's a lot of funny stuff in the liner notes, which of course probably can't repeat because this is a family-friendly podcast. But if you haven't read the liner notes to Master of Puppets in a while, check it out. They were definitely really starting to hit it big. They were getting some MTV coverage. I remember they were on an episode of Heavy Metal Mania, the precursor to the Headbangers Ball, and they were showing some live footage. Now, I had never seen Metallica live before. I don't know how many people did, unless you were actually at a concert. There was no YouTube back then, and they hadn't released any live videos, but there was little bits and pieces of footage of them performing at some outdoor concert. I think it was a Day on the Green festival. Mm-hmm. And just to see Cliff Burton playing live with his hair whipping around and his fingers just flying all over the fretboard on his bass, it was just something to behold. It really grabbed me. It was very, very cool and compelling to just watch. Even though I only showed them for like 15 seconds, but it was like, I got to watch that over and over again.
Yeah, and their last album with Cliff as well, unfortunately.
That's right. Yeah, unfortunately, he didn't make it for them. Yeah, that's right.
No, yeah. And some of that coverage and footage that you're talking about, Tim, was after this was when they finally got that Ozzy tour. And, Ozzy was also in the middle of being very MTV friendly and popular. So some of that stuff, too, was with them finally getting on a huge tour like with Ozzy and being able to almost, sort of go worldwide, which they really hadn't had that ability yet.
And it's funny, too, that it would be that time to tour with Ozzy, because I don't know that we're going to talk about his album from 1986 in this podcast, but he was full on glam at this point with the poofy hair and the sequins, and now here's Metallica and their jeans and it's a fun combination there.
Yeah, and some of that was also backed with ironically Hetfield and Lars Ulrich, their friendship with Tony Iommi, because Tony Iommi was friends with Lars Ulrich's father, and it just kind of worked out that way where they jumped on with Ozzy because they did a lot of Black Sabbath and stuff. They're very big Black Sabbath fans, and I'm not sure how much Ozzy fans they were at that point because, like you said, Ozzy had just transformed from this to all of a sudden that, and he was with the Aquanet Club at that point. So, yeah, it is an interesting combination considering what happened. They almost, before you go, Scott, they almost got thrown off that tour with Ozzy because Ozzy was very angry at Metallica because they would play Black Sabbath covers in their rehearsals. And Ozzy thought that they were mocking him by playing these songs in the rehearsals and before show sound checks, when in fact they were just playing them because they were trying to impress him and say we can play Black Sabbath. And some of it was hopefully that Ozzy would jump on stage and maybe if they played a Black Sabbath cover or something like that. But it was just funny because Ozzy was actually very upset at that because I think that was also during the time where he just hated everything Black Sabbath. It was very un-Black Sabbath at that point in Ozzy's career.
Right. Yeah. I'm going to speak strictly as just a huge fan. I mean, you guys have a lot of the background of this of a lot of this, and I'm so unfamiliar with some of the background information, but I love this album. This was really my introduction to Metallica at the time, because I'd heard of them. I didn't really listen to Ride the Lightning or Kill 'Em All. And, I didn't get really introduced until I started listening to this album. And I think of the first song I heard was probably Sanitarium. I believe it was on the radio on that one metal station that was around back then for us. And once I heard that song, I'm like, oh, these guys, there's something about them. And I got the album, and then Battery just struck me. I was like, this is like amazingly just powerful, fast, gets your blood pumping, just really good metal. And then, I slowly discovered the rest of the songs in the album, and I just fell in love with them. And Disposable Heroes is an amazing song. Damage Incorporated has probably become like my second favorite song from the album, other than the title track. I mean, you can't go wrong with that title track. Master of Puppets, I think that most people that have been fans of metal or hard rock, they know this song. They know how powerful it is. So yeah, this is a great pick. We all knew that it was coming. We all knew that we were going to have to talk about this album for 1986. It's obvious. I mean, and I would have to say it's my favorite Metallica album, and it is probably my favorite album of that year. I'm going to say it is my favorite album of that year. So the others there's a couple that are other close seconds, but this one is something special. And I was reading some of the notes here, and you know what? I'm not going to get into these technical things because I have no idea what they're talking about. What's a 4/4 and 4/6 time signature?
Well,
we don't really have to go into that.
I'm just
like, wow, they really dug in.
Well, and Metallica was also very much known with a lot of tempo changes. It's kind of what makes them difficult to play as a cover song because of the speed that they play with and their time signature changes, which is it's kind of how many clicks per second in comparison, beats per minute, time signatures. It's all very technical musical stuff that doesn't necessarily have a place on this show, but it makes it difficult to cover this band. Because it had such dynamics and such technical, they were a very technical band, even though they don't seem technical because they just play fast. But their very technical, aggressive style makes it difficult to cover this band unless you're just on top of your game, or you will mess it up. You will mess it up. It will not sound very good.
You know what? That's funny. I don't think I've ever heard a band cover a Metallica song.
It's difficult. We covered one. We did cover For Whom the Bell Tolls, because that was one of my favorite songs, and it's also a song where there's the intro is actually Cliff on bass with a distortion and a wah pedal like a guitar player would be. So that was kind of Cliff being my guy that I wanted to play like or be like or anything like that. We did play that song, and we played it well, but we rehearsed it for months before we actually played it on stage. Because if you don't play a Metallica song right, that kind of a heavy metal crowd will let you know immediately. They will let you know immediately that you did not play that right, and you should never play it again. Yeah. And the funny thing is, one real quick story. I did once go to a concert, and it was some kind of hair bands. We went as a group. And the funny thing at that show was they play the music before the show starts, and they play all kinds of different bands. They'll play a song or two, and they'll play the Scorpions, and they'll play this. And it was back during that time. And the largest scream and, crowd noise for any song that came on over the PA system before the band started were the Metallica songs.
Yeah, I remember that happening. I mean, I remember how they used to do that before shows. And the song that I remember that stood out, I don't remember hearing a Metallica song, but Heaven and Hell, Black Sabbath was one that always got the crowd going too. But this,
and I just remember that
the song that you mentioned, For Whom the Bell Tolls. I can't remember if I told you guys about this before, but it's like my favorite opening song to. It's the best opening song for any movie, and that was Zombieland, and it just the way the way that opens up with For Whom the Bell Tolls, everything's in slow motion, and there's just zombies running around in slow. It's just awesome. So that's one of my favorite things.
Pretty cool. Very
Favorite things
cool.
about
Very
that
cool.
song. But anyway, Master of Puppets, great pick.
And we got to mention the cover art. This brilliant cover art, and also the first Metallica album without any songwriting credits from Mr. Dave Mustaine. So they definitely were moved past that part of their history, and they certainly were coming into their own, and they were riding high until, unfortunately, like Chris mentioned, they had a major accident later in the year that kind of brought things to a halt. But
Yeah, which was a very sad time in the metal kind of, world, but especially in a Metallica heads world too. It was devastating because at that point, honestly, I guess it deserves a second to talk about it, because in that point, honestly, I don't really think anyone was sure if Metallica would go on, and I don't know if they knew that if Metallica was going to go on. Or really, I mean, it was very much an issue as to whether there would be a band.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes those things can tear a band apart, so unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, ready to move on to the next album?
Let's go. Who's going next? Is this Tim? Tim number
First
one?
pick. Let's go for it. What do you got?
I'm going to go with Queensryche's Rage for Order.
Okay.
Big fan of their EP. Big fan of their EP, big fan of Warning, but to me, they really put it together on this one. It was very different from the previous stuff. It was a lot more mechanized and synthesized, and there was keyboards, and it wasn't, unlike Metallica, where it's four guys in jeans going up there and ripping it. This album was more of a production. Definitely there was a vibe to it. There was a lot of creepiness, cool creepiness in the lyrics. Like their cover of "Gonna Get Close to You" is one of the all-time best stalker songs, and "London" is one of my favorite songs on the album too. Is it about vampires? Is it about Jack the Ripper? Is it, you don't really know. It's ominous, it's eerie, but it's cool. And there's a lot of just jam and metal on here too. But they definitely know how to tell a story with their lyrics. Jeff Tate's vocals were just top notch. The interplay between the two guitarists, Michael Wilton and Chris DeGarmo, was fantastic. Just so much imagery and atmosphere on this album. And then it's funny too, because we know 86 was when the big glam stuff was really front and center, and the picture of the guys on the back of the album, they're all decked out in their kind of weird gothy trench coats and poofy hair and stuff, and it's just funny because it's just not them, but they were doing what almost everyone else was doing at the time, but it all comes together, coalesces into a very cool package. This is one of the few albums I would call a perfect album. I can listen to this thing from start to finish, just like Master Puppets and a few others. Excellent album. Thinking man's metal, progressive metal. I don't know what you want to wrap it up with a nice bow, but definitely not your typical, party rock glam band of 86. A whole different animal.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. And you guys have taken my first two picks already of what my two top albums would have been. And this album was very, it was pivotal for me too. I think, I'd heard a little bit of the Queensryche. I'd been exposed a little bit, kind of like Metallica. I'd been slightly exposed to it, but then when this album came out, something about it grabbed my attention, and I just really got into it. And then so I had the cassette tape. I bought the cassette tape, and I was down by my dad's house. And I was visiting my dad for the weekend, and I was on my way home when I bought it. And I put it in, and I listened to the first couple songs, and the tape broke. Something went wrong. Something went wrong with the tape, and I was already 8-10 minutes down the road, and I'm like, dang, I can't go back. I had something else to get to or something, and so I couldn't. I was dying to get back and get to. So I like a few days later, I had to drive all the way back down to my dad's. It was like a half-hour drive, and when you're 16 or no, what was I? I'd be 18 at this point, I think 17 or 18 when this album came out. Anyway, so I didn't think that half hour, 40 minutes, man, I have to drive all the way back down there. Well, eventually I got back down to it, and I was so excited to get the cassette back in because I took it back to him because I didn't want to go and spend another $9 or whatever it was at the time, $8 or $9 for a cassette. Because again, as a 17, 18-year-old, you didn't have a whole lot of money flowing. So buying another one was kind of out of the question. I remember the song that really, really grabbed my attention the most on this was the first song on the second side, and that's New Regal. I don't know what it means. I've never really looked up the meaning, but I just think that song is just way awesome. And the rest of the album is amazing, and they really did with that Gonna Get Close to You cover, they took that video and they had that one in first, full circulation on MTV all the time. I'm trying to think of the other. I think they had Walk in the Shadows was probably one of the other videos that was pretty common. And then Chemical Youth was a great song too. And Tim, I like how you talk about how they tell stories. They really do. And this leads up to their next album, Operation Mindcrime, that really kind of is what do they call it? Like a rock opera kind of a thing. So this is kind of leading up to that, I think. So yeah, one of my favorite albums. I can still listen to it from number 1 to 11. So, Chris, what do you got on this one?
Well, Queensryche, great band, terrific band. Had the opportunity to do a few opening band shows with this album. And so first thing, just great guys. And this is when the original, Queensryche was still the original Queensryche. But, you go dynamic musically from, Jeff Tate's vocals, who, at this point and even later, 2-3 albums later, was just so ahead of the game with his vocals. There's been a lot of great singers in metal, and there's been a lot of really not so great singers. But Jeff Tate's kind of one of those guys that you could put in different types of music, and his voice would still just be incredible. It didn't necessarily have to suit what they were playing. It did in a spectacular way. But vocally, guitar-wise, Chris DeGarmo, I still think to this day one of the underrated hard rock, heavy metal guitar players of all time. The guy could do anything. He could play anyway. He could dynamically, he could shred, he could, play, standard background guitar. Just an incredible group of musicians here. And like Tim said, they kind of didn't fit the image that they had, visually as to musically. It was more thinking man's metal or thinking person's metal. It took that progressive metal from the prog rock of the 70s and maybe built and expounded on that to make it more modern. And I think some of that also is the record companies at that point saying, look, we're not going to promote you. We're not going to pursue this in any form or fashion unless you dress like this, look like this, do this, I'm not so sure that if Queensryche had the opportunity to say no, which at this point in your career as a band, you don't have that opportunity. If you don't have the backing from your record company, they'll just find Queensryche 2, make them dress the way that they want, write songs for them, promote them, and they'll just drop you. It doesn't matter how good you are in some aspects. If you don't have that backing or somebody who believes in you with that record company, they'll push you aside in a second if you don't do what they want you to do. But yeah, fantastic album, great group, a very, like Tim said also, you can listen to this front to back, side to side, however you listen to it, and not skip a song because they're all good. And sort of like my choice in a way is that this album was their sort of beginning because the next album really put them over the top. The same way kind of Metallica did with their next album, even though there was more of a time frame in between, really put them in front of the music society as a whole, not just reporters and fans that were just fans of that band. It put them in a national spotlight. So you can see it in this album, the beginnings of what Queensryche would do later. I think this is sort of their epicenter of creativity that just boosted their confidence and their ability to a whole different level coming up in the next few years.
That's pretty right on.
It was funny, too. Another thing, I remember these early days when I was getting into Queensryche, I knew there was something different about them just because one of the first people I ever heard refer to Queensryche, he was a friend of a friend. My buddy was a drummer. This guy was, I forget, I think he was also a drummer, too. But we were in high school, and my buddy asked the other guy, so, who's your favorite band right now? And the other guy, he was one of those real cool guys, and I was a couple of years younger, so I looked up to this dude. And I never forget the way he said it. He goes, I listened to a band called Queensryche. And just the way he said it was like, okay, there's something different about these guys, because who talks like that? You say my favorite band is so-and-so, or I love so-and-so, or so-and-so is awesome, but to say I listened to a band called Queensryche, I was like,
it's all so matter of fact.
I must investigate this. Yeah.
That's an interesting way to say it, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, and Scott, Dr. Google says New Regal is German for new rule or new regime or new order, something like that.
Oh, new order.
Yeah.
New order. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, one of the cool things, too, is maybe one of the coolest heavy metal logos that
Tri-Rite.
Yes, Tri-Rite, yeah. Just because Tim's mentioned album art and cover art, and it's kind of been a theme, especially for metal bands in the 80s, because it just, everyone was trying to one-up with the cover art. But I just always thought Queensryche's logo was just one of the cool logos that if you saw it, you immediately knew who it was. You're like, oh, who's that? Like Eddie was and Pusshead with Metallica with the drawings and certain things like on an album. You saw that and you're like, you automatically knew it was Queensryche, and it stood the test of a lot of albums in their career had that logo on it. So it was kind of, I just from the art standpoint, I just always thought it was one of the coolest logos I've ever seen.
That's cool. It's like, is it a weapon? Is it a symbol? Is it a spaceship? Just what is it?
Right. What is that crazy thing? Yeah, it's neat. It's just kind of cool, like a little dagger with wings or bat. I don't even know what it is, but it looks really cool.
It kind of reminds me of Batman's boomerang bat weapon that he uses.
Yeah, it's Batarang.
Exactly.
It's a queenerang.
All right. Okay, well, that's Queensryche. Then they go on to be one of my favorites over the years. So, well, you guys have taken my first two picks, so I got to move on to my third pick already.
You'll get nothing and like it, Scott.
Yeah, exactly. Shut up, Spalding.
Nice. A little Caddyshack reference. Very good.
Hey, 80s. What are you going to do?
So, I'm going to go with Tesla, Mechanical Resonance, for my first pick. This album was very cool. Loved it. Kind of got introduced to through Modern Day Cowboy, but one night I was sitting in my car, just dropping my girlfriend off, and Coming At You Live came on the radio, and that guitar intro just caught my attention, and I'm like, I have to have this album. And ever since that, once I got the album or the cassette, I listen to that thing over and over and over and over, and it's pretty much good from track one all the way down. You got Easy Come, Easy Go, Too Late for Love, Modern Day Cowboy, of course. Changes is a great song. I love the groove on that one. Little Susie, kind of a blues cover queen, is another great album. Love it, or song, sorry, not album. The whole thing is just it's worthy of every track, and that's something that's always been something that's interesting when you go and you buy an album because you hear a song or two, and then that's all you get is that song or two. This is another one of those albums where you get like every song is just interesting and fun and just rocking out, and it's good stuff. So what do you guys? Who wants to go?
Good. I'll go. It's Tesla. I think it's the birth of Tesla as far as I know. I don't even remember an EP or anything that they released before this. Like a lot of bands kind of had a little album or something like that before that. But yeah, it's a great album. A Geffen release. I always thought that Jeff Keefe had a very non-metal voice, but it went over well with the type of music because they were sort of a blues oriented, even though it was very much a metal band, as you would see later in their career, how much like bluesy that they really were at their core. But yeah, Modern Day Cowboy, I think, was probably the first song that anybody heard off of this album. And Coming at You Live, I remember seeing them live after this, and I think that was always the first song they played for their live show was Coming at You Live. I think they opened with that for years as their opening song from a live standpoint. But yeah, good songs all the way down. I mean, there's a couple of filler songs, but it's on every single album. I always thought Easy Come, Easy Go was a great song. Really good band. Frankie Hannon and Tommy Skeoch. I think it's pronounced Skeoch. I'm not totally sure on that. But great guitar players. Good solid rhythm section. Nothing spectacular. Great beginnings for a production crew and engineer, Steve Thompson and Michael Barbiero, who would later go on to produce countless hit metal and rock albums for the next foreseeable 6-7 years. They would be very much in the forefront of hard rock production. And one of the more popular songs on the album too, with Little Susie, is that I don't think a lot of people knew that was a cover song. Which it seemed like everybody at this point had a cover song on their album. It was almost unheard of to not have a cover song for a lot of bands. And I think Motley Crue sort of might have started that with Smoking in the Boys Room, who back then a lot of people didn't know that was a cover of a song. So, it's kind of, but great album and great band. I love this band. I've liked almost everything I think that they've released. I kind of went away from them after like 2 or 3 albums because it kind of didn't do much that I enjoyed after that. But this is a fantastic album and one of my favorites just to listen to. It's on my Spotify.
Cool. I had no idea until we talked about this that Little Susie was a cover. I'd never heard that song. No idea.
You're fired.
Who is it that did it originally? PhD?
Yeah. And I have no idea who they are. I think there was some affiliation with Jeff Beck or something like that. I don't remember, but I don't know much about PhD. I definitely can't say that. I don't know if you do, Tim, if you know anything about them, that band. I don't. I'd never heard of them before.
One of my buddies is a PhD, but he had nothing to do with it.
He didn't write Little Susie?
He did not.
Well, if you think about it, that song's got kind of a different sound than the rest of the album. It's got a little bit more of a bluesy sound to it, so I can see where it kind of comes from somebody else. But Tim, what do you think about this?
This is that's what happens when you read the liner notes on a cassette tape. You find these little nuggets out.
Sometimes, I didn't have this. I have the short attention span sometimes. So, Tim, what do you think about this album?
Yeah, it's good. It took me a while to warm up to Tesla because, I was 15 in 86 and I was very funny back then. I was very image conscious with my music, with my bands, and I liked the show. I liked the silly outfits and the outrageousness, and these guys really didn't have that. They were just like a meat and potatoes band. I mean, they're good, don't get me wrong, but I wasn't always grabbed by bands at first simply because of the music back then, during this time frame. So it took me a while to fully appreciate Tesla. But looking back on it, it's probably a good couple of years after it came out is when I finally bought a copy and just sat down and listened to the darn thing. And I know they really hit big with the 5-man acoustical jam thing a few years later, and that kind of took over the world, all the acoustic stuff, which I was never a super huge fan of. So, some of their ballads, I don't fire me from the show, but I would skip their ballads, their slower songs, and just get to the rockin' stuff, because that's what I like more on this album. Even a silly total 80s song like Rock Me to the Top is actually one of my favorite songs on this album, even though it's it's pretty much beneath them. I mean, lyrically, I mean, you read all the lyrics to all the songs on this album, and then that one kind of sticks out as they probably threw that together in about as long as it took to play the song, you know. But
Yeah.
it's, you know, and it's funny too because image-wise, I'm staring at the back cover art right now, and it's like a couple of the guys have the poodle hair going, and a couple of the guys don't. You know, clothes-wise, they look like they just wanted to stick to t-shirts and jeans. So. And they're on Geffen Records, right? So I wonder how the conversations went back then with management and the record label, and how are we going to position you guys? How, you know, what are we doing here? And they, I think, won out, you know, because they didn't come out in the crazy spandex and lipstick and whatever. I mean, they pretty much stuck to, you know, doing what they wanted to. Definitely solid. And speaking of liner notes, what's interesting to me is, you know, I also think, Chris, this was their first thing that anybody knew on a large scale. I'm sure they had demos and things in their
Yeah. I don't think anything that was ever released, like
right.
You know, yeah.
But it's funny, the CD booklet, and I'm assuming the original vinyl and cassette were the same way, but the CD, there's no song lyrics, but instead it's got like a 2-page story of the band and how they met and formed, and it's interesting. It's kind of ballsy, kind of different for a new band to put that in there. Makes them stand out a little bit.
So
Yeah.
I was just
I
looking
agree.
at some of the notes on the Wikipedia, and I found that they did have an EP, but it wasn't released until 2007, and it was only available on iTunes, and it's no longer available on iTunes. So probably never hear those songs.
Yeah.
So it's like
Couple of things too. I'll add real quick is that number, like Tim said with Geffen, but Geffen kind of had a weird mixture back then because they did have a lot of hair bands and a lot of the Aquanet clan, but they also kind of had some bands in this year and the next couple of years or so that were very dumbed down as far as the glam stuff. So I think Geffen kind of was able to float both sides of the fences in that way. So maybe that was their part of why they're like, okay, you know, if you want to have big hair, that's fine. If you want to wear jeans and stuff like that. But, and that you did mention the 5-man acoustical jam, which is a 1990 album. So I will talk about it for 1 second. But it was also, I believe, one of the factors that started to make MTV Unplugged very popular after that.
huge.
Because that album sold so well and went over so well, because it was just recorded in a club in a bar in Philadelphia, I think it was, if I remember some lyrics that they changed up on the album. But it's interesting that this band of all bands was sort of part of the beginning of the kicker of that whole. They may have actually, in a sense, hurt themselves because that might have sprung in a little bit more of the grunge of tuning down what hair bands were and what heavy metal was. So they may have almost helped bring apart their own demise because it sort of dumbed down the heavy metal to something more relatable. And that went over, you know, so well that I just wonder how much that had to do with the later of the heavy metal sort of really starting to get pushed aside.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I could see where that could be part of the fact.
It's kind of a long shot to say that, but at some point, maybe you drew in some fans that weren't necessarily heavy metal fans, even though it was a heavy metal band. And the second part was that maybe it was something that sort of helped spur on a little bit less of that crazy hair band stuff. Because right after that, like hair bands disappeared, like literally right at, like it fell off the table. I mean, Motley Crue started to dress in jeans and leather, but no more makeup and stuff. And that was Poison was gone basically from that. None of those 1-hit, 2-hit wonders from the 80s survived after that. It was almost like that was the tumbling point. It's ironic that maybe a heavy metal band had something to do with that.
All right. Well, do you want to move on to the next pick for Chris?
Yeah, this is number 2, correct? And I'm going to go sort of maybe off the cuff with something that you wouldn't expect from me, being the thrash speed kind of fool that I am, but I'm going to take Cinderella's Night
There goes
Songs.
one of my backup albums. Thank you very much.
And again, it's, I believe their first album, their debut in a sense. I think they had a little bit of a connection with John Bon Jovi and that sort of thing. So maybe they had a leg up as far as that goes. But all around, I think an incredible band. A lot of their songs still kind of stand up today. I was just listening to them to get refreshed on Spotify, and just how many songs. And even my wife was with me in the car, and we're listening to it, and she's like, "Oh, I didn't know that was Cinderella. I always loved that song. I didn't know that was Cinderella." So it's like they wrote a bunch of songs that you don't even realize are theirs, but they're so good. Very bluesy based album, maybe in the kind of the form of Tesla, although they did certainly take the hairband dress up, pink animal print, big boots and leather and, 14-inch styled up Aquanet hair. But taking that all aside, Tom Kiefer is incredible. He's an incredible musician. I think he can play something like 7 or 8 different instruments. Great voice, great guitar player. And you listen, you go down this album. I mean, there's Night Songs, there's Shake Me, Nobody's Fool, which is probably on this album what most people remember. Somebody Save Me, great song as well. So just, one of my favorite albums from this year, one of my favorite, if you want to call them a hair band because of the look. I guess this is the kind of music that I would have listened to, even though they had a different kind of image. But I just think fantastic album, very well produced, very well written songs. Something that you could listen to this album and say, okay, this band might make 2 or 3 more albums. This band might not have just this one, and then we'll never hear from them again, like so many other metal bands starting out now did. But one of my favorite groups, and saw them live a couple times, and 10 times better live than you would ever think. A very tight, well put together band.
Tim?
Yeah, it's another one. It took me a little bit, despite how good the songs were, because I had these irrational reasons why I wouldn't like bands back during this time frame. And one of them with Cinderella was my good buddy, my neighbor, the drummer, who was starting up a metal band, and they had this brilliant idea to call themselves Snow White, because they just thought that would be the coolest, most ironically awesome thing to have a really heavy metal band named after a Disney princess. And then Cinderella came out right at that exact time. My buddy had to change his band name, and he was all pissed about it. So then I couldn't like Cinderella, in solidarity with my buddy. But and I used to be really, I used to think that Tom Kiefer sort of looked like Beaver from Leave It to Beaver, all grown up and metaled out. And I couldn't get past that for a while. Like I couldn't stand looking at him because he just reminded me too much of the Beav.
He does kind of look like him, doesn't he? I can see that relation. That's funny. Okay, go on.
But once I kind of saw the light a little bit and started to realize, you should really listen to music for the music and not for how they look. Then I realized this is a phenomenal album. The one that really jumps out at me is Somebody Save Me. I could listen to that song endlessly. I don't know why that song out of any of the others, but I just love the groove and the chorus vocals. I saw them live once, opening for Judas Priest, which I thought was going to be like a weird mix, but they held their own. And Tom Kiefer really impressed me as one of those rare triple threat guys, because he's an excellent songwriter, he's an excellent lead guitarist, and a singer. I mean, that's pretty hard to do one of those, but do all three pretty readily. So I mean, a lot of respect for that guy. And again, I'm sitting here looking at the liner notes, and I need to ask, who wins the award for littlest dude with biggest hair? Is it Jeff LaBar from Cinderella, or is it Kiss's drummer at the time, Eric Carr?
That could be a tie. That could very well be a tie. But you wouldn't have known it, though, because he had like 6-inch heels on.
I would have to throw Vinnie Vincent into that mix, too, as far as a small guy, too. Anyway, go ahead.
No, it's definitely solid. Made me pay attention to Cinderella, even though, like I say, I did first. I couldn't rightfully like them. But and Chris, the other thing you need to mention about their look, because you checked off all the things on their checklist on what they needed to look cool.
Yeah.
Also, scarves. They had many scarves.
A lot of scarves. Yeah, very much a scarf fan. And the funny thing is, you just compared Tom Kiefer to me, which is hilarious. But if you look at this album cover from a distance, and like I'm looking at it right now on my computer, and you would swear that Tom Kiefer might be Blackie Lawless for a second.
Okay.
He kind of has the same stance and the same like jet black tall hair. Like if you just flicked your eyes for a second, you might mistake him for Blackie Lawless. So I don't know if that was intentionally the look he was going for or what, but it's or unless at that point there was like a single heavy metal dressing room somewhere in LA where you just went to pick out clothes that, you know, okay, this is what Blackie wore in his last album. Oh, I like it. I'm going to put that on too. I don't know if there was like a changing room for every metal band that went through LA because they all seem to kind of dress the same way. But yeah,
I'm doing this.
Funny.
I'm doing exactly what you just said. I got my CD. I'm staring at it from a distance, and Jeff LaBar looks exactly like Jakey Lee.
That's true too. Yeah, Jakey
Have you
Lee.
ever seen any of them on stage at the same time? So who knows? Maybe they are the same person.
I don't think Cinderella ever played with Wasp so you'd have to look that up. Maybe we're all being fooled here. Maybe we are somebody's fool.
Yeah.
Nice.
Oh,
I had to take advantage. That was a moment I had to take advantage of. I'm sorry.
that's good.
Somebody save this
please.
podcast.
Oh, all right.
Where's the rim shot?
Ba-dum-bum. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Scott. What do you think about the Cinderella Boys?
It was my next pick. Again, taken from me. All right, out of my hands. Thank you. No, that's cool. I'm glad that we're kind of picking a lot of the same albums. It just shows how powerful these albums were that year. This I love, beginning to end. Love all the songs on it. It's awesome stuff. The thing that stands out in my mind with Cinderella is, I liked them back in the mid and late 80s. I listened to their cassettes several times on road trips or whatever, start to finish, and I never got a chance to see them live until it had to be about 2005 or 2006 or something, about 10 years ago, up at Summerfest up in Wisconsin. You know what I'm talking about, right, Tim?
Oh yeah, that's an awesome thing. If you're ever in Milwaukee around 4th of July, you gotta go to
blast.
Summerfest.
And they had a lineup of the four of the hair bands from the 80s. It was like this kind of a reunion, not a reunion tour, but you know what I mean, like a nostalgia tour. So it was Slaughter, and then Dokken, and then Cinderella, and then Poison wrapped up the show. And so we bought tickets for that show, because that was one of the ones that was featured in the big stadium there. And Slaughter they were okay. They did a pretty good job. Dokken was a little weak because Don Dokken had a jet ski accident like 2 days before, and his back was out, so he could hardly move around. he couldn't do anything, and he's apologizing in the beginning of the show. He's like, "I'm sorry, I can't move around. I wiped out on a jet ski." And then Cinderella came on, and they blew me away. And I was so impressed with Tom Kiefer and his vocals. I love his raspiness to his voice. He's got that bluesy sound, and you go on to the next album with Long Cold Winter, and you hear that similar blues kind of a feel to it. And Poison came on last, but by far Cinderella outplayed all the other bands. And I was so glad that I went to the show just for that, just to experience Cinderella live. They blew me away. So it was very, very cool.
Yeah, I went to see, I saw them with, they were sandwiched in between Extreme and David Lee Roth at the USF Sundome many, many, many moons ago. Yeah, and I mean, they blew away both of those bands without question. I could have not had either and just had Cinderella play for 2.5 hours. It would have been one of the best shows I've ever been to. They just dominated the stage. I mean, they're a really, really, really good live band.
Cool. All right, so I guess it's my turn. Is it my turn? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
No. Is it my turn for my second pick, or is it yours? No. What do we do?
I think it's mine.
Okay.
I think it's Tim's.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's
Tim's.
Tim's.
but but fear not. I don't think I'm going to steal another one from you. I don't think I'm going to steal the ball from you again.
Okay. What do you got?
I'm going to go with the self-titled debut from the Florida band Crimson Glory. These guys, I think, had, in the local scene, they had sort of made a name for themselves under their original name, Beowulf, and they changed it to Crimson Glory. They wore masks, and I really do think they tried to keep their identity somewhat secret, like Kiss was doing in the makeup days. I first learned of Crimson Glory. I read about them in Hit Parader magazine, and there was some sort of little blurb that said, like, combining the theatrics of Kiss with the metallic muscle of something. As soon as I saw Kiss, I'm like, I gotta check these guys out. And of course, they don't sound anything like Kiss. They're more for, if you don't know them, they're another thinking man's progressive metal, type band for fans of vintage Savatage or Queensryche. They're one of those kind of bands. But their singer, who unfortunately is no longer with us, went by the name of Midnight, and he was one of the best high-pitched metal singers of all time. The guy's range was unbelievable, and it's such a shame that, according to the stories, he fell into addictions and his life sort of crumbled around him, and he died way too young. But at this point, Crimson Glory was a 5-piece twin guitar attack. John Drenning and Ben Jackson on guitar, a fantastic rhythm section, Jeff Lords on bass, and Dana Brunell on drums. This album is it's less than 40 minutes long. It's pretty much a quick hitter, but there's some just crazy thrash. The song Mayday melts your face, and it's about the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster that happened earlier in '86. So it's actually kind of a serious song as you're rocking out and throwing the horns and going nuts, and you think about what they're singing about. You're like, well, wait a minute. But again, there's like the Queensryche album. There's a lot of atmosphere, a lot of just cool metal, a lot of interesting stuff. There's the closing song called Lost Reflection is just creepy. It's almost scary listening to it the first time if you're by yourself with headphones. They would go on to do even better things I forget, 1 or 2 podcasts from now. We'll revisit these guys. But, Crimson Glory, self-titled. If you haven't heard these guys, please YouTube them, search them out, Google them, do whatever you got to do. Try to get a copy of this and check it out. Because if you like that kind of sophisticated, thought-provoking metal, you'll absolutely love these guys.
Yeah, and it was funny that this it's a local to sort of our area, because it was my area, because it was Sarasota, which is just across the Scowey Bridge, a little bit south of where we are. But they kind of mirrored Savage's career in a sense, the same time frames, similar musical spectrum, similar genre, like Tim said, more of a thinking metal lyrically, sonically, a lot of changes, a lot of dynamics, very tight band, and a lot of some of the local award show, which were very big in this area in the late 80s, up to the late 90s, that like the Tampa Bay Music Awards were a very big deal, throughout that time period. Because there were some metal bands that came from this area or recorded in this area, and Morrisound Studios in Tampa, which is still around with Tom and Jim Morris, that put out a lot more 80s and 90s hard rock and metal bands than you would ever think, like that little studio in the middle of Tampa. So it was a very well-known band in our area. Always fought to be neck and neck with Savatage, and a lot of the award shows and things like that, they did win more awards sometimes than Savatage did. But I'll tell you, they are a fantastic band, and Tim reaching out there and grabbing this band out of there is really kind of cool. I listened to more Savatage than I did Crimson, but at the same time, it was something that you were heartfelt and gave you that desire to say, hey, if this band and this band can make it from here, then we can make it from here. So certainly as a band that I looked up to from a local standpoint, to say if they can get there, we can get there too, because just because you're not from the Tampa Bay area doesn't mean you can't be found and seen and heard. So it's really cool that you brought this up, because it's a band that definitely means something for this area locally, to say, kind of local area boys done good.
Well, I have more homework to do apparently. So, I think we lost Tim for a second. Hold on. Timeout.
Now he's here.
Tim?
Yeah, you guys there?
Check.
Yeah.
1, 2. Testing. Check.
Siblings. Yeah, I don't know what happened there.
Well, that was weird. So you shut down Skype and reopened it, and it.
No, I was going to. I was gonna, and then it just worked again. So whatever. Okay. Technology. So I don't know how far you guys carried on. The last thing I heard was Chris talking about Sabotage and Crimson Glory, neck and neck for various awards, and then it went kablooey on me. So I don't know how far you guys went past that.
Kind of after that, I just said it was, it was cool that you brought them up, because from a local standpoint, it was kind of a band that you could look to along with Sabotage to say, if these local guys could make it, we could make it. So you don't have to be in LA to get found. You can get found in Tampa area, playing and stuff like that. And pretty much not much after that.
Yeah.
Chris, were you ever able to see Crimson Glory live? Because that's was on my bucket list, but they're pretty much defunct at this point, so I think I'm missing out on that.
They played some local shows back when some of the Tampa clubs were still around, like the ML Chasers and the different clubs that were around here. So I saw them play once and only once. But yeah, very, very, very good.
Well, I've never heard of this band before, so I really don't have much to add. You've given me more homework, obviously, as you guys do every week, which is cool. I've learned, what was it? I think it was the first Sabotage album. That one really, I was impressed with that one. Then Tim told me about a band called Holland, which was pretty impressive too. So now I'm gonna have to check out Crimson Glory, because I do like the progressive sound of like a Queensryche and Sabotage or what they were doing. So I guess I'm gonna have to see if I can find it. Might be on YouTube or something. Anyway, my next pick, right?
I believe so. This is your number 2, right?
Number 2.
Okay.
Who does number 2 work for? Not an 80's quote, but good enough. Whatever. Anyway, I am gonna go with something that I'm definitely not gonna say it was one of my favorite albums, but I was hoping it would be good. This was, David Lee Roth had just left Van Halen. He did his Crazy from the Heat album. I was hoping he got that out of the way, because when I heard the lineup for his new band, I was like, no way, this is going to be awesome. You've got Steve Vai on lead guitar. You've got Billy Sheehan for a bass guitar, and he was awesome. And I just thought it was going to be a really, really good album, and it was disappointing. It had a couple of okay songs on it, but overall it was really not even. The guitar licks were interesting by Steve Vai sometimes, and Billy Sheehan did show off his bass line in a couple of songs. I think one of the songs that he brought with him was Shy Boy, which has like the best, bass line in it. Kind of a bass solo, I think, at one point. I haven't listened to this album in a long time, and probably because I didn't care for it much after it initially hit. And I just really thought there was so much potential between those three artists, between David Lee Roth, hopefully having a comeback, and Steve Vai and Billy Sheehan. So I wasn't very familiar with the drummer, so I don't know about that one. But that's my third pick. I just want to talk about it. I feel like I'm at a meeting for people trying to get past albums for this one. So, what do you guys think of this one, Chris?
Well, you you forgot what could be heavy metal's version of a veteran utility infielder, Greg Bissonette on drums, who I think played for everyone at some point, and maybe twice. But yeah, Billy Sheehan's great. He's a great bass player, fantastic bass player, virtuoso bass player almost. If you ever seen him live or doing some solo work and things like that. And Steve Vai is, he's Steve Vai. It's the guitar and bass work and even the drumming on this album are really incredible. You put guys like that in a studio and something cool is going to come out. Am I the biggest fan of this? Probably not. Poor David Lee Roth just lost me. I loved Van Halen growing up. I liked the old Van Halen. But somewhere around the time that David Lee Roth thought he was going to be a movie and TV star, he just kind of lost me. Track wise on this, Yankee Rose is kind of a fun song. It's kind of a tongue in cheek of the Statue of Liberty. More covers on this, that seemed to be a David Lee Roth staple for like the previous 4 years or 5 years up to this, is where half of his records that were with whatever band he was with or even his solo stuff was so cover oriented. It just didn't have the songs, or he just didn't care. Like, I'm going to write 6 songs for this album and the rest I'm just going to do covers and it's going to sell because I'm on it. But yeah, Going Crazy was a pop song basically. It was just very keyboard heavy. So I love I like the musical part of this because of the Steve Vai, Billy Sheehan kind of, like you said, Scott, you wanted this record to be good. You really did. Just wanted it to be good. It had such all-stars on it, and it never did anything for me personally, but it sold, it went platinum.
Yeah.
But I think in a sense, like after this might have been, I think he had one more solo album after this. But he just kind of lost me in the translation. And you're right though. Like I wanted it to be good. I wanted it to be good for poor Dave. I did. I really, really did. I wanted it to be good. And, like I said, aside from the great musicians that he got to get in the studio with them, I think it kind of was less than what I wanted it to be, but probably what I expected it to be in hindsight.
Yeah. Tim?
Yeah, I wasn't, again, don't fire me from the podcast, but I wasn't really the world's biggest Van Halen fan, but I was interested to see what was going to happen with him leaving and, wondering what they were going to do, what's he going to do, and then that EP was a fun little diversion. And so, yeah, when I heard he was teaming up with Steve Vai, who I knew a little bit about, and Billy Sheehan, again, like you're saying, Scott, was very curious and expecting big things. And I really like Yankee Rose. That was didn't he do like a big wacky fun video for that?
Oh, yeah.
It was party rock.
Yeah, definitely.
It was, I like that. That was cool. And Shy Boy's a great tune. But again, it actually came from Billy's previous band, Talus, but it's a cool song. And I did like Going Crazy, even though it was poppy and all that. But, like we're talking about, he definitely was into covers because there's only, like you said, Chris, there's only 6 originals really on here.
Yeah, I didn't even count, but I'm just like, that seems like his modus operandi is I'm going to do about a half a dozen original songs, and whatever else we're going to throw on there, let's just come up with some funny covers we can do in 5 minutes, and let's get it out there as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I swear I remember reading a quote from him where he said doing cover songs was the way to go, because if you pick a song that people know, that's half the battle towards it being successful for you, is they already know it. You don't have to get past the new material. Maybe they won't like it kind of thing. But, the whole album's 30 minutes long, which, that, I don't know. Tesla, they debuted this year, as we already talked about. How long was their album? 12 songs, and then here you got this established guy, this all-star lineup, and they can barely scratch out 30 minutes. And,
which is like 3.5 Metallica songs, basically.
yeah, side one of Master of Puppets.
Nice.
But it's funny because he came out and he did a huge tour, like you mentioned, with the Ed Cinderella and Extreme opening for him. That was a big deal. I mean, they were playing outdoor sheds, right? He was still pretty hot at this point, but
they played the Sun Dome. Yeah,
he did, well, maybe not so gradually, but he did kind of go on a downward spiral over the next several years because he did have several more solo albums, but I think each one was significantly less selling than its predecessor. I think.
Yeah. That's a nicer way to say it. That's a nice way to say it, Tim. I think progressively worse is probably the better way to say it.
So, but I will say, back when I used to trade tapes with people back in the dark, dreary days of the mid '90s when all my bands had died, a guy I never knew this, but David Lee Roth recorded this album in Spanish with a different title, Sonrisa Salvaje, and I never knew that, but yeah, at the time he recorded Eat 'Em and Smile, he had a coach, I guess, come in and they worked out the Spanish versions of the lyrics and they did Spanish language versions of every song on the album and released it separately. I mean, that's pretty cool. Who else had ever done that? That was kind of neat.
Yeah, that was unique for them, for anybody to do that. I had never seen that done, and I didn't even know it until you talked about it. That's pretty funny though. So, what's next? You guys there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, is it my number?
I don't know. I lost track.
Yeah, it is time for Chris's number 3.
Right, it's my number 3, right? Okay.
Yes. Sorry, I was reading something. I was reading about the Spanish version of David Lee Roth, but I got sidetracked. All right, go ahead. Chris, number 3.
Yeah, which by the real quick on that, which by the way was I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think that was the bass player. Why did I just lost his name?
Billy Sheehan.
I think that was Billy Sheehan's idea. And
really?
I don't know, I think Billy Sheehan had something to do with that in any case. So, but, I mean, I could be unbelievably wrong, but
Hey, you know what the Spanish title for Shy Boy is?
No. What? Shy Boy?
Timido.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah. And the Spanish title for Yankee Rose? Yankee Rose.
There you go.
Nice.
I'm going to go for my number 3, a little off the map because it wasn't necessarily an album that you would recognize, especially then. It was released in '86, but I'm going to go with Guns N' Roses EP, Live Like a Suicide, and it was only a 4-song album, and 2 of which were original. One of which was original to Guns N' Roses because one of the songs they brought over, Reckless Life, was written as Hollywood Rose, which later became parts of Guns N' Roses. But a cover of Aerosmith, Mama Kin, which is how I heard of this album before the following year's album that sold kind of well came out. Which was an Aerosmith, because a friend of mine's older brother was a huge Aerosmith fan, and he was kind of much older than us. So he was like in love with everything Aerosmith, and he got a hold of this album that had an Aerosmith cover. Remember back then, bootlegs and things were traded, and hey, my friend has a bootleg of this or this. So he had a copy of this, and we listened to it, and I was like, wow, that's really different. It's kind of heavy metal, but it's kind of different heavy metal. It's really super aggressive, but it wasn't thrash. So it was just something really super different. And I guess not knowing what would happen later with that album that sold a few copies, this album was kind of like something different. It was very much different. It wasn't glam. It had a very in-your-face kind of sound and tone, short songs to the point, a lot of screaming, great guitar work. So it kind of caught me listening to this. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know where they were from. I didn't know anything about them. Just heard this album. And, of course, later is like, oh, okay, now I get where they were going. So this album for me kind of spurned a little bit of a short-lived enjoyment of what Guns N' Roses would become. And it really spoke as something sort of in between the thrash and like a slower version of thrash, because Slash wasn't a big heavy, quick picker, but it had a blues effect, and just, really an album that I like. Move to the City is great. Reckless Life, Nice Boys is a cover. It's kind of filler, maybe just part of their show. Sneaky too, because the title of the song, the Live Like a Suicide, it's just a part of that weird dark part of Hollywood that you didn't really see. This is not the image and portrayal of the hair bands and the purple and the scarves that Tim so well mentioned and stuff. This is the gutter bands playing in the clubs for years, trying to make it. Just thought it had an aggressive side to it that I really kind of took to.
Yeah, it's weird. I didn't know about this until they re-released it a couple of years later as part of the GNR Lies, Rush thing that they put out to capitalize on their newfound fame. But
right.
It's fun. And, of course, again, I didn't know at the time, not until many years later, that it's a fake live recording. It's actually done in the studio. I actually didn't know how to pronounce the flipping title of the EP because they have those characters in there. It looks like there's a curse word. Is it live blankety blankety blank like a suicide? Is it live? Is it live blankety blankety blank like a suicide? I mean, what is this thing? And it's funny that I do think it is just live like a suicide, and they just chose to have those funny characters. Yeah, it's off the wall. The cover art only shows 2 of the band members. It's like, okay, And what's funny now, I just checked this out on Wikipedia. According to Duff McKagan, bass player's autobiography, the live crowd noise was actually from the Texas Jam Festival recorded in the 1970s. It totally had nothing to do with Guns N' Roses. Now, that's funny.
Ah, that's hilarious. Yeah, I didn't know that either, Tim, until much later because, there was no Google back then. You couldn't find that. But, yeah, I didn't. It's funny that it was a joke. But I wonder if the GNR Lies title later was a little bit of a clue that they were lying about the live album. I don't know. It just kind of
yeah, it's interesting. That's fun.
Sometimes they do that to say GNR Lies. Like maybe it was part of the fact that they were giving it up without giving it up, that there was nothing live about this album.
Well, it's cool though. It's definitely fun. It's a quick, 4-song bang, 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 you're done. And again, you wouldn't skip any of it. It's so short. Even if you didn't like a song, you'd listen to it. But it's good quality stuff. And I sure like their cover of Mamakin, and Nice Boys too, for that matter, like 1,000,000 times more than their cover of Knocking on Heaven's Door. Oh my God, I don't ever need to hear that song again.
Yeah, I could do without ever hearing that song. But I just thought like that was the first song I heard off it was Mama Kin. Now, that was a great cover of the Aerosmith song. It was really good, and that's one of my favorite Aerosmith songs too. Anyway, but the album just struck me as kind of like, wow, that, like you said, Tim, it's 13 minutes and a few seconds. It's over really almost before you even started. It's a 3-minute, 3.5 minute, almost 4-minute song, and it just goes boom, But it made an impact because it was powerful. It had some powerful music there, and you just kind of wondered, like, what was this going to turn into?
Yeah,
Scott.
I heard. I remember hearing Mamakin on the radio a couple times, once it was re-released or whatever, but I never heard the rest of the album, so I don't know. Have a lot to say about that. I know
homework.
Yeah, 1987. I know we'll be talking about Guns N' Roses probably again. So
maybe.
Yeah, just a little album they had, just, right? So, Tim, your third pick, right?
Yeah. And I'm going to go with Killer Dwarfs, a Canadian band.
That's awesome. They were on the radio today. Actually, I saw the name come up on the satellite radio.
Really?
Yeah. Didn't get to listen to the song though.
This could be a real band, or it could be the Dwarfs from Spinal Tap that actually made a band that toured with Spinal Tap. We're not totally sure.
Oh my gosh.
No, sorry, Tim, go ahead.
No, yeah, the Spinal Tap guys, yeah, definitely, and their album was called Danger of Being Trod Upon. Yes.
Oh my god. You guys are killing me.
And their first song was, "Is this inches or feet?"
Yes.
All right, let's move on. Keep going. Killer Dwarves. Tim?
The Killer Dwarfs. Yeah, no, they had a couple of cool videos on MTV for the title track, Stand Tall, and another one called Keep the Spirit Alive, where it was fun. These guys injected a big sense of fun into their music without being total cartoons. They went in a little bit for the big hair and the bandanas and whatever, but great musicians. I don't know. There were gimmicks. There were a lot of gimmicks. They went by claiming that we're all related, that they were brothers. Their names were Russ Dwarf, Mike Dwarf, Daryl Dwarf, and Bad Ronald Dwarf. I mean, you don't mess with somebody named Bad Ronald Dwarf, right? But they were Canadian, and at the time, the only Canadian bands I really knew were Triumph and Rush. So to me, and Helix a little bit, and Kick-Axe, I guess, was Canadian, but not too many Canadian bands on the metal scene, really. A little bit interesting story, I think, from their background is that they were, desperate to hit it big in America, like every metal band was at the time, and somehow, some way, they got played on the radio down in San Antonio. Some DJ down there picked them up and played them, and so then they had a following in San Antonio, of all places, and so then they came down and they started touring around, and they never got huge fun. They never really hit it super big. I don't know, whatever, but it's just a quality hard rock band with pretty decent production on this album. It got a little better as they moved on in their career, but good radio friendly borderline hard rock metal with catchy choruses, and just I like their vibe. It's just funny. The singer Russ Dwarf, he's not very tall, and one of his gimmicks was that he would come out on stage and ride around on a tricycle and like wipe out and crash and roll around the stage and do headstands and just goofy stuff like that. But he always sang, man. I've seen them live a couple times in their later years, and even with all the silliness and running around and goofiness, they never let that overshadow the music. They definitely were a very tight live band, and I really wish they would have resonated more. I wish they would have sold more and had a better go of it. And I feel like they kind of got shortchanged. I'm really not trying to make all these puns here, but they just keep coming up.
Yeah. From 1986, if you put me back in 1986, I would have no idea who the Killer Dwarfs are. I think, and I don't know if it was in the 80s, it could have been very early 90s, maybe 1989. I think they had an album that had a song on it that hit well and had some play. Might have been like their biggest hit. I'm not Wikipediaing this because I'm really wanting to just figure out who they are without reading on it. But I swear I hear this name from much later, the Killer Dwarfs. Is that completely inaccurate, Tim? Did they have more of a hit later?
Yeah, they had their major label debut was a couple years later, and then in 1990 they released Dirty Weapons, and the title track from that album had a video and got on the radio a little bit.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what you're talking about.
It could be. It's probably it. It's different. But if you put me in 1986, I have no idea who. This is another session of Tim giving some more homework.
Yeah, more homework for me too. The funny thing that I think about it when I see their name is actually their name, Killer Dwarfs. It's not like when plural dwarfs are actually dwarves. Isn't that correct?
Oh, right. Yeah, no, that's very significant that it is Killer Dwarfs. Yes.
Yeah, it's not Killer Dwarves. It's Killer Dwarfs.
Yeah. And now I am looking it up now. And did they, Tim, type Killer Dwarfs in the way that it is here with a mixture of capital and lowercase letters? Is that supposed to spell anything? Is this record playing backwards, go kill everyone or something? Or is it significant that they did that? Or is it just because they're just goofy people?
I think they designed their logo after having a couple too few many moose heads.
Probably.
Oh, yeah, hater. Take off, eh?
Couple of nights of too many Molsons and moose heads, and you got a mixture of upper and lower case letter. But I am looking it up, though. It is Dirty Weapons. It says 1990, so I guess it's not out of tune since it's not an 80s album. But yeah,
occasionally we're allowed to dabble in the other decades. So anyway, I really don't have a lot on this. I mean, I remember hearing the name out there, and remember probably hearing a couple songs on the radio or something. Somehow I heard of these people.
It was Z-Rock. That was the big, I don't know if you guys remember Z-Rock. It finally just came to me. That was the big radio station that eventually ended up getting simulcast around the country in the 80s. Like you were talking about KNAC out west, but Z-Rock was, I don't know where they were based. They might have been based in Texas. It might have actually been based in San Antonio. But I think that's how they came down. They got into that, and they got a little bit of exposure, which turned into some MTV videos and, a little bit of pub and all that. But yeah, Z-Rock was the big radio station that a lot of people would get some of their, new metal bands from.
Yeah, because that was national syndication or something like that, right?
Yeah, it does compare them to Iron Maiden and Saxon as a similar style.
Cool.
I don't know about that, but
yeah, it says it's though not British, they're sometimes compared to new wave of British heavy metal acts such as Iron Maiden, Saxon. But if I'm just remembering that song that I have heard from them, I kind of can't quantify that as accurate in any form or fashion. I don't see where that fits in there. I don't see where that fits at all.
No, I don't remember ever seeing Bruce Dickinson or Biff Byford cruise around on tricycles on stage, so I'm not sure.
Not that we know of, but they can wreck airplanes.
Sure.
All right,
Scott, what do you got? Number 3.
Well, this is, I think this is where
it always sounds painful to you. Do you enjoy these podcasts? You sound like
you sound like, are you sure? Do you need to take a moment or something like that? Do you need an aspirin? Anything?
I'm no, it's all good. It's just, I'm getting to that point where I'm like, I can't pick albums anymore. It's like there's so many that are on a similar level, other than the ones that we talked about already.
Gotcha.
So I'm gonna go with
Brittany Fox.
No, Lionel Richie, Dancing on the Ceiling.
Fantastic, great choice.
All right, so looking at the list, having a hard time choosing, I'm gonna have to go with 5150. Van Halen. Now, this was Sammy's first album, and at first I didn't like it because I was still on the David Lee Roth thing, and I was hoping that was going to be successful, and I think I had a little bit of, I don't know, I was resentful or something towards Van Halen, and I didn't want to accept this new singer, and I think a lot of people felt that way at first. I can't remember the first single that came off of that album, but I knew it was like, was it Love Walks In, I think, was the first single, but then I heard, oh man, sorry, I lost my page.
I think the one I remember coming first was Why Can't This Be Love? I thought that was
it. Yeah, that was it. And then Get Up. I heard that and I'm like, wow, this is really a good rocking song. It's very fast paced. Sammy's singing well. Eddie's playing well. So, it took me a while to go back and really like this album. I had to give it some time. Summer Nights is a great song. Best of Both Worlds was all over MTV, of course. And then I started liking some more of the songs. Like Good Enough is another great song too. So, and 5150. So how do you guys feel about this one with the new lineup?
I was a Van Halen fan. I guess I kind of didn't like 1984 as much as I liked the previous incarnation. I think they sort of changed then, and I think this was a measurable sort of change again. Obviously, with Diamond Dave leaving and getting replaced by Sammy Hagar, and then the whole Van Halen, Van Hagar, who's gonna, and then David Lee Roth actually took the producer with her, Ted Templeman, who had done previous albums, and I think musically it doesn't always sound like Van Halen, and it shouldn't, because it's not Van Halen anymore. It's the musician part is still there, but they were writing songs in a different dynamic with a different person who had different type of lyrics and singing style, and so I guess it should never have been compared to say, is this still going to be Van Halen? Because it wasn't Van Halen anymore. It was different. But I thought it had a lot of like love songs, I guess, slow song, ballady kind of songs. I was never really much into that. Good Enough, like you said, Scott, is kind of guitar heavy. It sort of showed what Eddie Van Halen could do. I thought it just really poppy, I guess. Best of Both Worlds is kind of poppy. Summer Nights. I mean, Get Up is a good rockin' song. But Dreams and Why Can't They, it didn't fit with me. It just wasn't my sound. Not that it was bad. It was good for what it was. It just sort of didn't fit my musical taste at that point, or what I thought. I wanted Van Halen to always be Ain't Talking About Love and Anything on Fair Warning, and that's what I wanted them to be. Selfishly, in my aspect, bands grow up and they grow different and they do different types of music, and that's great, and they're still doing it. Still sold, millions of albums and was very popular. And the two other things are the irony of how they met, with the whole Ferrari mechanic story. Who knows if that's true? They're both getting their Ferraris fixed at the same mechanic and introduced by a mechanic. Who knows? That could be just a story. And also the fact that there were the whispers and things that some of this album was written previous, and it was supposed to have been a partial, if not some of the soundtrack to Top Gun. And the movie theater got scared when David Lee Roth left the band and sort of dropped the idea. And these were some songs that were left over to what, who knows if that was ever true or not, but it was certainly a rumor going around. And especially with some of the videos with the F-14s flying and things like that, and love songs and ballads that if you look at the movie now would kind of fit in certain spaces. And so it's just an intriguing album and a tangent off the Van Halen tree. I think even though their name stayed the same, they were obviously a very different band. Obviously a very different band at this point.
Totally different band.
Yeah, totally. And they should have never been compared to what Van Halen was, because it wasn't Van Halen anymore. It wasn't the Van Halen that, I'm going to become Don't Step on My Grass guy, because it wasn't the Van Halen that I grew up with. So I don't know what it was, but it was, it proved to be popular. Certainly did.
Timmy.
Yeah, well, it was a different band, man. It was Van Hagar. It was totally different. So I'm just looking here to see, I'm doing a little head-to-head comparison here. 5150 came out in March of that year. Eat 'Em and Smile came out in July. So Van Halen actually got the jump. And I never really realized that before. But remember when there were all those rumors before Sammy Hagar joined that Eddie Van Halen was looking at some kind of, let's say, outside-the-box choices to replace David Lee Roth? Remember, one of them was Patti Smythe from the band Scandal. Everybody remember that?
Yeah.
I had some friends who were diehard Van Halen fans, and that just about killed them flat out when they heard that. Like, are you serious? That can't be true. But, I like 5150. There's some, again, I think more commercial ballady type stuff maybe I could do without. But Get Up and, like you're saying, 5150 and Best of Both Worlds, I like those quite a bit. Good enough, though, I want to ask you guys, because you're bigger Van Halen fans than I am. Did it seem a little forced to you? I mean, to me, it seemed like they were trying to make Sammy Hagar sound wacky and ad-libby like David Lee Roth had done on some previous Van Halen songs, and it just sounded fake to me. The whole, what's that? Rackle what? It just seemed like over-the-top silly and forced. I don't know what you guys think, but I'm curious.
No, I do. You're absolutely right, because it kind of did. Maybe it was tongue-in-cheek, or, just to do that, to poke fun at, like, hey, look, Dave, we're getting along. We don't need you. And these guys were petty like that. I mean, Eddie Van Halen has a reputation of being a very petty kind of personality. So it did kind of remind you of that whole, hey, one break coming up, on
right, exactly. Yeah.
That back and forth with the, come on, Dave, give me a break. It did have a little bit of a snip of that as well. So, yeah, interesting take on that. But, yeah, it does seem. I think some of the whole album seems forced. It was written and produced and done and released, it didn't take a lot of time for this album to come out, considering they didn't really have a singer for a year. So I think in a sense it leads to believe that some of this album was already written, and they said, look, Sammy, we've already got some of this. We got to get something out. We got to get it out before Dave puts something out, because we got to show people that we're still a band to be reckoned with. So we've got all these songs already written. Let's sit down. Let's write a few more, get it, tighten it up, and put it out as quick as possible. That's what this album always seemed like to me. Get it out before Dave gets his out.
And why were people reluctant to accept Sammy Hagar? I mean, because he had a good solo career. People liked Sammy Hagar.
He did.
Sammy Hagar was popular. He was known as the Red Rocker, not the Red Ballad guy. You know, I mean, I don't know why people were predisposed to dislike him in Van Halen.
I think it was because of Three Lock Box, that song. This 1, 2, 3 lock box. No, I don't know. I really, which I think is a terrible song. But in any case, but I don't think it was necessarily as much it was Sammy Hagar as it was just Van Halen not being Van Halen.
I think that's what it was. Because I just
like would it have been better if it was Patty Smythe? I mean, what would that have looked like?
I don't know.
Van Patty, or the lead singer from Mr. Big, who would be in Mr. Big later. I think he was one of the guys that was up to. I mean,
Eric Martin. Yeah, I think maybe yeah.
And I just remember there was a lot of different rumors. I mean, who knows what was actually going on behind the scenes? I mean, we talked years prior that Eddie Van Halen was almost joined Kiss at one point or something. I mean, who knows what was really going on? But yeah, I don't know why it was Sammy Hagar. I think it was just that it wasn't David Lee Roth. And
I think that was the case for me. I think that was what it really boiled down to. And I just didn't want to accept the fact that it was, Van Halen was kind of over.
Yeah.
And it was a new Van Halen, and we had to adapt to that. But I grew to like him, and I grew to like him a lot. So I like Van Hagar.
And it wasn't, it ended up not being like this was like this incarnation of Van Halen. I think maybe some people thought, well, they're going to do this, and then the next album, David Lee Roth's going to come back, and there's a reunion, everything's going to be great. And the fact of the matter is that they went on to make more than a few albums.
Yeah.
So this was what until Sammy kind of hung it up, and with that, years and years later, decided to make tequila and all that stuff.
It's good tequila too, by the way.
I've heard. I'm not a drinker, so I don't know, but I've actually heard that it was. But yeah, I just in my retrospect, it just wasn't. It did seem forced, Tim. That's a very good word. I think a lot of this whole album, you could say that almost. It felt forced, and it felt like something. Like I said, let's get something out before Dave does.
And it worked because according to Wiki, I don't know how out of date these numbers are, but the 5150 6 times platinum in the U.S. and Dave's album merely double platinum.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think it probably sold at least 3 to 4 times as many albums. I mean, this was like, there were some revolving radio hits on this album. You say what you want about the album, but why can't? I mean, Dreams and Love Comes Walking In, or whatever that name of that song was. Love Walks In, I guess is what it is. But yeah. I mean, Best of Both Worlds, Summer Nights, those songs right there. Like, the videos were on MTV constantly. Mm-hmm. I remember like him and like Hagar and Eddie Van Halen and Michael Anthony doing like that high step walk on the stage together in the video and all that. So I think it kind of, in a sense, also worked to their advantage because it seemed like there was less stress in Van Halen, and it seemed like it was a fun show to go see live. Like they were having fun on stage.
Yeah, that's funny. If the album was forced, right, but then the tour...
Yeah, the live. Yeah, exactly. The live was exactly the opposite. The live seemed like Live Without a Net, I think it was called, which was released later. It seemed like these guys have been playing together for 10 years. It didn't seem forced. Maybe that's just to their great musicianship, or maybe they did actually get along. It was a new lease on life. The stress from dealing with David Lee Roth was gone, and Van Halen was just playing music again, and it was fun. It wasn't like a job. It became fun again. And that came over in the live shows. But so, it ended up being something good because they did go on to string together, a few good albums after this. I mean, I thought.
Yeah, I agree. I liked them after this too. So anyway, all right. Well, look, we've got to wrap this one up for now. I think we have some more albums to talk about though. So if you guys want to do a part 2, you guys down with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a bunch more albums on here that I would like to dive into. So if you guys are okay with it, I think a part two would be great.
I suppose.
Yeah, I know we didn't talk about probably a couple on here that you're gonna like to dig up, some obscure ones. You guys are always good at that. So, all right, let's wrap it up, and we will. Let's see. How about social media? Go ahead, Chris. How do we reach you?
Facebook is just my name, Christopher Warren, and Twitter is @ChristopherZen.
Okay, and Tim?
I'm on Facebook. My name, Tim Wodzinski, and Twitter, TSW512. How about you, Scott?
And you can reach me @Scott's Eye on Twitter or @80's Auto Reverse. Also on Facebook, you can find me under Scott Compton Photography or @80's Mixtape Auto Reverse. Sorry, there's too many words here. I always do this. I get tongue-tied when I get to this point. Anyway, so, all right. Well, I hope everybody enjoys the show, and we will talk again more 86 next time. Everybody, we will talk to you later.
We hope you've enjoyed this show. This podcast is part of the 80s Reboot Overdrive channel on Southgate Media Group. You can follow us on Facebook on the 80s Reboot group page. We're also on Twitter and Tumblr @80s Reboot. We invite you to check out all the wonderful podcasts and blogs available at southgatemediagroup.com. And thank you for reliving the 80s.